It took me some time to decide whether I should tell this. And even now, there are parts I would still rather not remember. That night, the silence of the cemetery wasn't normal. It wasn't that countryside silence we're used to. It was as if everything had stopped, as if even the wind was afraid to pass through there. And it was exactly in that silence that he heard the hooves. First distant, then closer, and then they stopped right in front of the place where he was hiding. If he hadn't remembered what his grandmother used to say, I wouldn't be here today telling this story. And the worst part is that the next day, I saw the marks, and they weren't from any ordinary animal. I've done a bit of everything in this life. Heavy labor, road work, assistant, watchman. Whatever came up, I took it without thinking twice. Anyone who lives like this knows how it is. When an opportunity appears, you don't get picky. You just go, because staying still, in the end, is worse. That's exactly how I ended up in that place, without asking many questions, without imagining what was waiting for me there. A friend of mine, a truck driver, told me that a town hall in the countryside of Minas Gerais needed people. He hauled freight there, knew the locals, and said he could give them my name. He said it was an easy, steady job, something rare for someone who lives off odd jobs. At that time, I had been out of work for a while, so I accepted without thinking much, without imagining that this simple decision would end up being marked in my life. The trip was long. Dirt roads, uphill climbs, dense forest on both sides. And the further I went, the more it felt like I was moving away from everything. There was no movement, no city noisy at all, just sound of the wind. And sometimes not even that. It was a strange silence, the kind that starts to bother you without you realizing it. When I finally arrived, I saw it was exactly as he had described, a small town frozen in time. There was a simple central square, some old houses around it, and up on a hill, a church, and behind the church, the cemetery. It's always like that, right? Anyone who knows small towns knows that church and cemetery are almost always close together. But there was something different there. It wasn't just the position, it was the feeling. Even during the day, the place seemed to quiet. Quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. And it wasn't a normal silence. It was the kind that makes you uneasy, like there's something there, just waiting. The cemetery was large, much bigger than I expected for a town that size. Later I understood why. They said a saint had appeared there many years ago, and that ended up attracting people from everywhere. Many outsiders wanted to be buried there, as if the place had some kind of protection. Whether it was true or not, I could never say. But the cemetery was full. That much was certain. There were old graves, large mausoleums, old constructions with heavy iron gates, all spread out along narrow dirt paths. In some places the ground went uphill, in others downhill, and there were parts where the weeds were already taking over, as if the place was slowly being forgotten over the years. During the day, it was still manageable to work, but just by looking, I could already imagine what that place was like at night. That's where they put me, day shift. And there was another gravedigger, the night shift one. His name was Ador, a quieter guy, kept to himself. Not much for conversation, but he didn't seem strange either. The kind who just does his job, and that's it, without getting involved with anyone. Whenever we met during the shift change, he was almost always in the guard booth, drinking coffee, watching something on that small, old TV that stayed on all the time. It was a simple routine, normal, at least, in the beginning. The first few days passed without anything unusual. Regular work, cleaning graves, helping with burials, doing maintenance. But there was something that started to bother me. Silence. Even during the day, there were moments when the cemetery became too quiet. No wind, no birds, no sound at all. And when that happened, a bad feeling came, hard to explain. Anyone who has worked in isolated places knows what I'm talking about. Sometimes it feels like you're not alone, even when you don't see anyone. And that feeling started to grow inside me. A restlessness, but I ignored it. We always ignore it at first. Until the day it happened. That morning, I arrived at work as usual. I walked up the dirt path to the cemetery gate, already expecting to find Ador there in the booth, like every day. But that day, he wasn't there. Right away, it seemed strange, because he was always there, without exception. It was almost like a clock. I arrived, and he was already in the booth, coffee in hand, waiting for his shift to end. But that day, nothing, no sign of him. I stopped for a moment before entering, looking around more carefully. The square was still empty, the church closed, and the wind, practically non-existent. It was as if the entire place was frozen, suspended. Even so, I went in. There was no reason to turn back at that moment, or at least that's what I thought. Ador, I called out, right at the entrance, trying to sound calm. No answer. I walked a few more steps, looking between the graves, trying to locate him somewhere. Maybe he was finishing some task before leaving. Hey, Ador, I called again, louder this time. Nothing. And that's when that feeling came back. Stronger than before, more present. It was hard to explain, but it felt like the place was wrong. It wasn't just the silence. It was like something was out of place, even though I couldn't see exactly what. I kept walking, slower now, paying attention to everything around me. The sound of my own footsteps seemed too loud on that dirt ground, echoing among the old graves and closed mausoleums. That's when I heard it, a voice, low, muffled. I'm here, Chico. At that moment, I froze. My whole body locked up, as if something was holding me there. I looked around, trying to understand where it had come from. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't my imagination. It was him, here, inside. The voice continued, even weaker. I followed the sound carefully, feeling a tightness in my chest that made no sense. I reached one of the mausoleums, and that's when I saw it, the gate, made of cast iron, heavy, but completely out of the ordinary. It was bent, pushed inward, as if something had slammed into it with absurd force. It wasn't something a man alone could do. Actually, that moment, even before asking anything, I felt it. That hadn't been done by a person. That was the first thing that crossed my mind, even though I didn't want to admit it. Still, I moved closer to the gate, trying to understand what was going on. The iron was warped inward, as if it had taken an extremely strong blow. It wasn't just bent, it was jammed, stuck in a strange way, as if it had been forced beyond its normal limit. "What are you doing in there, Ador?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, even as I felt growing discomfort. On the other side, he took a few seconds to answer, and when he did, I knew right away he was scared. "Get me out of here first, for God's sake. Then I'll explain." His voice wasn't the same as usual. It trembled, low, tired. That was enough to send a chill up my spine. I grabbed the gate with both hands and pulled hard, trying to open it any way I could. Nothing, not even a centimeter. I tried again, using my body weight, planting my foot on the ground for leverage. The iron didn't even budge. "Push from there," I shouted. "I'm pushing." He answered from the other side, straining. I could hear him struggling inside. The iron creaked. but didn't give. It was as if it had been crushed against the wall, stuck in an impossible way. Archie, that moment an idea started forming in my head, even though I tried to ignore it. That wasn't human strength. It made no sense. Still, I took a deep breath and said, "Stay there. I'll get tools." I left quickly, but without running. Even so, every step felt too heavy. The cemetery's silence was different. Denser, more present, as if the place was holding its breath. I went to the booth, grabbed a sledgehammer and the rope used to lower coffins. When I came back, it felt like the path was longer and emptier than before, as if everything around had changed. When I got back, he was still there, in the same place. "Hurry up," he said, almost whispering, as if he was afraid to even speak louder. I passed the sledgehammer through an opening in the gate and tied the rope where the iron was most stuck. I secured it well, pulling hard to see if it held. My hands were already sweaty. I don't know if from the effort or that strange feeling that wouldn't go away. "When I say it, hit it," I said, trying to stay in control. He answered with just a quiet okay, and then it began. The first strike echoed through the entire cemetery, a dry sound, heavy, that hit the mausoleum walls and came back, as if the place itself was repeating it. On the second strike, I felt a chill. It wasn't because of the noise. It was the feeling. It was as if that sound was calling something. I pulled the rope with all my strength, trying to open space, while he struck from inside with the sledgehammer. Each impact made the iron vibrate, tremble in my hands, but it still resisted. It felt like that gate didn't want to open, as if something beyond normal force was holding it shut. "Harder," I shouted, already feeling my arm getting tired. He hit again and again, and once more. The sound of the hammer seemed louder each time, more aggressive, echoing through the empty cemetery. With each strike, the feeling that something was wrong only grew. It was as if that noise was disturbing the place itself, as if it wasn't supposed to be happening. Until, on one of the strikes, the iron cracked. A sharp, dry sound, and the gate finally gave way. It burst open in one sudden movement, and Adar came out. But he didn't just come out. He bolted, like someone running from something. He ran without looking back, dropped the hammer on the ground and crossed the cemetery almost running, stumbling between the graves. "Adar!" I shouted, but he didn't answer. I ran after him, trying to catch up, but the emptiness around only grew. He reached the booth, grabbed his backpack in a hurry, stuffing everything inside carelessly, and started walking toward the gate without looking back. His face was pale, his eyes lost you, filled with a fear that's sinking to my own chest. "What do you mean? What happened in there?" I asked, almost out of breath, already feeling my heart racing. He shook his head, unable to answer. I can't. He repeated, faster each time, "I'm going to the church, then to the town hall, to quit." And he began to walk away, going down the street toward the church. And I realized at that moment, it wasn't ordinary fear. That was the kind of fear that gets into your head and never leaves. As he walked away, the cemetery returned to absolute silence. But it wasn't the silence I had known before. It was heavy, dense, filled with something that felt invisible, roaming among the graves. In the late afternoon, a city hall employee showed up and told me that Adar had quit, claiming problems with his wife. They asked if I could cover both shifts for a few days. I agreed, but deep down I already knew. Before taking the night shift, I decided to stop by the inn where he was staying. I needed to understand, needed to see if all of that had really happened. When I knocked on the door, it took a while before he answered, and when he opened, I noticed something strange. He looked older, more tired, more scared. "Come in," he said, quickly closing the door and placing a heavy piece of wood to lock it. All the windows were tightly shut. That wasn't an exaggeration. He went to make coffee, and I sat in silence, watching his every move. The place felt too cramped, too closed. When he came back, he brought 2 mugs and sat in front of me. We stayed silent for a few seconds, the weight of it all hanging in the room. Finally, I asked, "Now tell me, what was that?" He looked at me, thought for a moment, said, "If I fight you, you'll think I've gone crazy." At that moment, I already knew the answer. Silence filled the room again. It wasn't a normal silence. It was that heavy, dense kind, like any word could bring something back. I held the coffee mug, but didn't drink. I just kept looking at him, waiting. "I won't call you crazy," I said, "but I'm not leaving here without understanding." He took a deep breath, ran his hand over his face, and began to speak, slowly, as if each word carried weight. "The night was normal," he said, looking at the floor, avoiding my gaze, like all the others. He said he had started his shift as usual, left his backpack in the booth, fixed a leaking faucet, then cleaned a recently used mausoleum. Routine stuff. Nothing unusual. Then he went back to the booth, made coffee, and watched TV. Up to that point, everything seemed normal, but he knew calm never lasts. "But the problem doesn't always start with noise," he continued. "Sometimes it starts with silence." He described the full moon, bright, lighting everything around. The shadows of the trees were sharp. Every movement drew attention. Around 9:30, he went out for the first patrol of the night. And that's when he saw a woman, alone, leaving the church, crying, with no one around. At that hour, that was already unusual. He approached, trying to understand, to help, asked what had happened. But she looked at him with a hatred he had never seen in anyone. She spoke quickly, nervously, about a man, a promise, a betrayal. She talked about a priest who had taken her purity and promised to leave everything, but then denied it. And she said something he would never forget: "If he doesn't stay with me, he will be cursed forever." That didn't seem like just anger, it felt like something else. He tried to calm her, but she became even more agitated. Said all men were the same and ran off, disappearing into the darkness of the street. After that, everything seemed normal again. But he knew, from experience, that normal on a night like that never lasts. The silence returned, heavy, foretelling something that was coming. Later, close to midnight, he woke up for the second patrol. He grabbed the flashlight, left the booth, and felt the cemetery's silence like never before. Everything felt heavy, motionless, still. There was no wind, no sound of animals, just his own breathing echoing among graves and mausoleums. And then he heard the first noise. Distant, slow, heavy, but coming in his direction. "I thought it was an animal," he said, his voice low, almost trembling. But when I turned the flashlight, he stopped. Swartz, wald had no head mom hatched hobos. From the neck came fire, high flames lighting everything around. The eyes, red, alive, like embers, fixed on him, and the thing started coming toward him. He ran without thinking, didn't look back. Entered the first mausoleum he found, pulled the gate, locked it with chain and padlock, and hid behind a grave. Every step echoed, every beat of his breathing seemed to give him away, but it didn't matter. The sound entered the cemetery, hooves striking the ground, echoing among tombstones and mausoleums. Its presence was inevitable, overwhelming. The creature stopped right in front of the gate, as if it knew exactly where he was hiding, The gate began to move on its own. First slowly, then with force, pushed by violent kicks. I thought, "This is it," he said, almost whispering. Sooner or later it would break through. Each impact made the ground shake, made the walls vibrate. The fear seemed to take over the air around, suffocating, constant. That's when he remembered his grandmother's stories. "White objects," she said, "drive things like that away." Not knowing if it would work, he put his hand in his pocket and grabbed whatever white thing he had. He stopped praying out loud and held the object tightly. At that very moment, the creature stopped. It circled the mausoleum, as if investigating, and then went away. The silence returned, total, but it wasn't relief. He stayed there, hidden, motionless, until the sun began to rise. He didn't have the courage to leave, nor to try to open the gate. Every shadow looked like an enemy. Every sound was amplified by tension. He waited, silently, hearing only his own heartbeat. Waiting for someone to arrive. For me, for anything that would break that suffocating solitude. When he finally finished telling everything, I stayed quiet for a while. I could only believe what I had just heard. Because anyone who has been through places like that in the countryside knows this kind of silence. Knows that not every silence is harmless. That sometimes it's a warning that something has passed, something we can't explain. And in that place, that night, something had definitely passed. On my way back to the cemetery that same night, I saw it. Marks on the ground, deep, as if something heavy had struck with force, and the gate. That iron gate she bent and warped hadn't been moved by any man. It was impossible. The cemetery returned to its usual silence, but I knew it wasn't the same silence as before. Something had passed there, something that leaves traces that can't be explained. To this day, I've never seen anything like it, but I know what I felt that night. The presence, the force, the fear that Ado carried. The invisible weight hanging among the graves, in the cemetery's corridors. If it had been me, maybe I wouldn't be here to tell it. That feeling, you don't forget. And even with reason trying to convince me otherwise, my heart knows that something supernatural happened there. And the scariest part was that there was no logical explanation for any of it. The gate, the hoofbeats, the fire, the creature. Everything seemed impossible, but the evidence was right before my eyes. The truth is that some stories from the countryside are not told for no reason. They carry warning, memory, fear. And I never forgot that night, that silence, that cemetery. Who was the woman Ador had found? To this day, I still have no answers. Tide.